Hello. 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 Hello.
Hello, fellow YouTubers. Welcome to My Kidney Transplant Story Part 1. I'm doing this in multiple parts because even the Reader's Digest version of my kidney transplant story is a little bit too long for the 10-minute YouTube time limit. I've decided to tell my kidney transplant story for two reasons, really. First of all, I'm doing this as a tribute to my kidney donor and very good friend, Art. Art is better known to those of you on the Antique Radio Forum as 2B or not 2B. This is Art here.
Now I have precisely the right instrument, at precisely the right moment of history, in exactly the right place.
As you can see, Art's also a World War II reenactor. If it was not for Art and the support of his terrific family, then this video and my current quality of life would not be possible. The second reason I decided to tell my story is hopefully to maybe inspire or give some hope to those of you out there who have kidney disease or in kidney failure, that are on dialysis and that are on the transplant list waiting for a transplant. This will hopefully maybe give you a little bit of information into what happens in a kidney transplant, and to show you that the wait may not be as long as you think. Miracles do happen. And while Art may or may not agree with me, I believe that that my transplant, the circumstances that brought Art into my life at just the time that I needed him, could have been nothing short of God's hand at work. So, the reason I needed a kidney transplant: I was born with a genetic kidney disease known as polycystic kidney disease, or PKD. Some of you may be familiar with that because there's a lot of us out here that have that particular disease. There's no cure and there's no real treatment for it. However, the upside of this particular disease is that it progresses very, very slowly. I got it from my mother's side of the family. My mother had it, one of her brothers had it, her mother had it, and I got it. But it wasn't until I was in my 30s before I actually knew that I had it. The first symptoms didn't show up until then. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-40s before my kidneys finally failed for good. And this occurred the day after Thanksgiving, 2002. That day I began to vomit, which is not pleasant under any circumstances. And over the next course of that December, I continued to vomit frequently. I had no appetite, and what little I could eat, I couldn't keep down. About the only thing I could eat at that point was chicken broth, chicken noodle soup, that sort of thing. And not too much of that. Consequently, over the course of that December, I went from about 203 or 4 pounds to about 170 pounds. And unfortunately, not all of that was fat. A lot of that was muscle tissue. Because my body wasn't getting enough protein intake, it started to eat itself. And I'm still working on trying to recover that muscle mass, but that's a story for another video. So that January, I started on dialysis. Kidney dialysis is not fun, and it has its own set of problems. but that also is another story. I also wanted to say before I go on that those of you that are in kidney failure, those of you that are getting ready to have a transplant or thinking about it, or on the transplant list, or you're getting ready to have dialysis, you know, if you have any questions about these things, feel free to ask me. I'll do my best to answer them. While I'm not a doctor and not an expert on these things, I have been through it, so I can tell you how things were from my experience. And I'll do my best to help you any way I can. Okay, I was on dialysis, and at the time I was taking a Kenpo karate class. And it just so happened that a couple of months prior, Art had joined the class. He'd also entered his children into the children's class. And that's how we met. We had only known each other through that class for a couple of months. And I showed up to class right after I got on the kidney transplant list. And while we were waiting for class to begin, I was telling him my story. Told him that, I had no hope of getting a living donor because all of my immediate family were already deceased, and neither my wife nor any of my friends had the same blood type as I did, which was a prerequisite. Well, the next class, I wasn't able to show up because I simply wasn't up to it. But my wife, who was also in the class, she went to the class, and Art and his wife came up to her, and Art told her that after hearing my story, he had thought about it and discussed it with his family, and that he had decided that since he had the same blood type I did, he would donate one of his kidneys to me.
To the Batmobile. This could be the break we've been looking for.
Well, needless to say, I was flabbergasted. And how do you say thank you to someone for something like that? Thank you just isn't sufficient. But Art, thank you anyway. So anyway, at that point, we began doing all the tests and the interviews and the paperwork, of which there is a considerable amount. I had decided to have my transplant done at the transplant center at the Carolinas Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's only about 90 minutes up the road from where I live, and so that's where I decided to have it. So both Art and I had to make several trips up there for lab tests and for interviews, because they ask you a lot of questions. You fill out forms because they want to make sure that you know what you're getting into, especially the donor. And of course they have to do a lot of tests to find out your compatibility and that sort of thing. Make sure you don't have any problems that might interfere with the transplant. Well, they scheduled our transplant to occur in June of 2003. We arrived the night before for the transplant, and we found out there was a problem. And we weren't able to go ahead with the transplant at that time. Looks like my time is about up here, so I'll continue this story in part 2. I will see you in part 2 shortly.
Show's over for now.